I'm the senior manager for conservation science at the Natural Areas Conservancy, and my background is plant ecology. I've been working in urban forest inventory management, community planning, and research for more than 30 years in the New York City metro region. So in this webinar, I'll be telling you about some of the Natural Area Conservancy's work in New York City natural area forests, and in particular, the results from our forest assessments, and the changes that we see 10 years after the initial assessment. And if we have time, I'll go into a few examples of how we've used this forest data to implement management. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the Natural Areas Conservancy. We're a nonprofit organization. We're based in New York City, and we partner very closely with the New York City Parks Department, especially the Environment and Planning Division, which includes the Natural Resources Group. And we also partner very closely with other park conservancies, such as the Van Cortlandt and Riverside Park Conservancy. And we do this to support the care and the protection of natural areas in New York City. We also convene a 26-city network called Forests and Cities, and we work toward nationally preserving, improving, and expanding urban forested natural areas across the country. Next slide. So a little stats about New York City. We conducted a wall-to-wall land cover study about 15 years ago, and we wanted to understand where the green space was in New York City. So from this, we were able to see that 40.5% of New York City's land area is actually made up of some form of green space. And that's all the way from like golf courses to backyards, but a full 12% of that 40% is made up of natural areas. And we describe natural areas as the forests, the wetlands, and the grasslands in New York City. There's also 300 miles of trails in New York City parks, and in New York City, 500 miles of coastline. So we have a lot of wonderful natural features and significant ecosystems in the city. Next slide. So within that 12%, we have forested natural areas, and that's on the map on the right, that's shown in green. The wetlands of our city are the blue area, and grasslands, including dune grasslands, are shown in that sort of magenta color. And our forests, our natural area forests, hold 71% of the trees in the city, making up a quarter of the canopy. And these forests capture a great deal of stormwater as well as hold tree carbon, keeping it from atmosphere and storing it there. Next slide, please. I'd like to define a little bit what we consider our forested natural areas. It's that segment that's outlined here in that dotted line where it's not our street trees or our landscape park trees or trees in the yard, although that is considered what we call like our urban forest. Our forested natural areas are that part of the urban forest where it looks like the woods, basically. It has a different kind of structure than the urban forest where you just have street trees and street pits. An urban natural area forest, you have deep soil layers, built upon space. And there are a lot of components to that forest. We think about the soil and the microfauna that lives in that soil, the birds and the other animals that use that forest as part of the components that make up forested natural spaces. And next slide. I'm going to give you the quick 2-second tour of some of these natural spaces, just to give you an idea of what they look like. This is the Bronx, for instance, with this terrific glacial uh, bedrock exposure. This is a Van Cortlandt Park, an oak tulip tree forest in the Northwest Woods. Next slide. And this is Manhattan. This is Inwood Hill Park at the very northern tip of the city. This is another oak tulip forest with a terrific understory, the next structural layer of spicebush, a wonderful native shrub that likes moisture. Next slide. And this is Queens. This is a coastal oak hickory forest in Forest Park, Queens. Um, uh, One of our largest contiguous forests, oak forests in the city. This patch is about 500 acres with lots of great trails that go through it. Next slide. And this is Brooklyn, showing a maritime forest along the coast where the salt spray and sandy soils have a whole different composition. This is a forest, a much more lower stature forest, but it's made up of bayberry that reaches tree size. It's really a unique kind of forest that we are lucky enough to have in New York City. Marine Park, where this shot is from, is actually one of the largest parks. Well, it is the largest park in Brooklyn at about 800 acres. And the next slide. And last but not least, this is Staten Island, a sweet gum forest in Wolf's Pond Park on the south shore of Staten Island. And we see a lot of these successional sweet gum forests in places that are treed post-agriculture. So next slide. After that whirlwind tour of what some of these forested natural areas look like, I'd like to tell you about our forest assessments. Next slide. So one of the Natural Areas Conservancy's foundational projects was started in 2013, and it was part of an assessment of all natural areas in the city, including freshwater wetlands, salt marshes along the coast, and forests and grasslands. We also partnered with the U.S. Forest Service social scientists to conduct a companion social assessment. But our goal was to assess all of these natural spaces, collect quantitative information so that we could really document what was it there, what the condition was, and be able to track it over time. But today I'll be talking just in detail about our forest assessment. And next slide, please. So we collaborated with New York City Parks Department to complete this quantitative assessment in all 5 boroughs. It was completed in 2014, and those green areas show you where we dropped plots, circular fixed radius plots in a grid of about one sample plot per 2 hectares. We covered 71 different parks and laid down a lot of plots, about 1,400. And our focus area was parkland that was not only forested, but was part of the Forever Wild protection. And this is a designation that Parks has created to allow for some extra protection of these natural spaces and to really document, sort of designate the more intact and valuable forest or other natural spaces throughout the city. Next slide. So the data that we collected, we wanted to look at what we call different structural layers. We have the overstory, the trees that make up the canopy, the closed canopy that you think of when you think of a forest, and we call that the overstory. And we define that as trees that are 10 centimeters in diameter or greater. And that DBH means diameter at breast height. It's a standard measurement that all foresters use, and that is a, um, a regular, well-established measurement so that we're all kind of talking the same language when we talk about diameter. We also looked at the mid-story that is made up of the saplings and the younger trees and the shrubs that exist under that canopy. So it can be smaller stature species or shrubs or the growing trees that will finally, at maturity, go into the canopy. We also measured our understory, what's growing on the forest floor, made up of the seedlings, tree seedlings, shrub seedlings, and herbaceous plants. There's many more components. We also looked at coarse woody material, that is logs and other dead wood on the ground. We took soil samples. We looked at different impacts that we noticed, management concerns. Uh, but in all of this, I'll be mainly focusing on telling you about some really overarching results from our study. Uh, Within each of those different structural layers, we looked at the species composition. So, identifying it as if we could, and mostly could, down to what exact species we were looking at. Next slide. So from all this information, we had a really thorough quantitative picture of what was present in our forests. We took all of that data and we created a sort of index or formula of what were the components that indicated a healthy condition and what were the components that showed that there was a threat to our forests or that some sort of degradation. And we plotted each one of those individual sample sites, which we call a plot, on that scale that you see in the right, as in, is it a scale of health and threat? So the higher up on the vertical axis there means the healthier, the lower down, less healthy. On the horizontal axis to the left indicates the uh, the threat. At the very left is the lowest threat. On the right is the highest threat. So we were able to classify all of our forested plots and hence all of our forests as either being high health, low threat, or very low health and high threat as the worst or more degraded sites, the sites that need more work. We took all of this information and we bundled it into what we call a forest management framework, or FMF as we refer it to. And that is develops the place where we really lay out the condition of our forests. Some of the things that we saw that when you go from our larger trees to our smaller trees, we have a pretty healthy canopy. About 85% of the city's, all of the city's forests are made up of native trees, indigenous to a certain kind of community type that you would expect in New York City. When we go to the smaller stature trees that we'll call the mid-story, it's a little bit less so, but still 80%. And when we look at the ground cover, unfortunately, it's less than half of what we see on the forest floor is native. The other components are either non-native or invasive species, and that's kind of troublesome. Next slide. So what we did in our forest management framework was set some goals so that we could increase the health of our forests, make more of a connection between people and our forest and natural spaces, and ensure that our forests are supported into the future, not only for their care, but also in providing all the ecosystem services that they do to New York City. So those are the three focal areas in which we broke down a lot of our recommendations, and they range from things like reducing the ecological threats by bringing the proportion of invasive species to less than 10% instead of, a greater number, or um, increasing the number of green jobs that are in the city to support caring for these spaces and connecting uh, communities as informed and active stewards of our natural areas. So next slide. So that forest management framework came out in 2018, and our first forest assessment was conducted and final in completed in 2014. 10 years later, in 2024, we were at the point where we're like, okay, 10 years has passed. It seems like a lot of time to us. To a forest, that's not a heck of a lot of time. But we thought that is enough time to start to look at what might have changed since we first collected that data. We focused on not reassessing all those 1,400 plots, but in 2014, we marked a certain number of plots permanently, adding tree tags to each tree, creating a way to relocate the center of our plots. And uh, so in 2024, 2 years ago, we went back to those same plots and remeasured them. In addition, we distributed some additional permanent plots so that in the future we'll have more data to also compare when we do resample them again in another 10 years. So this allowed us for the first time to start to say something about change over time and comparing those two sets of data. And next slide. So into the findings, what did we see in 10 years change of time? Next slide. So one of our biggest takeaways is our overstory is still predominantly native, and those trees are growing, and that expansion of our overstory is increasing. But the smaller tree size classes, those younger ones that will eventually replace our much larger trees in the canopy, are less native. And we knew that, but it's they're even even less native, if you like, and I'll dig into the details of that. Our forests are also becoming less resilient, and we see that as because we see an increase in invasive vines. That was another component that we measured. We measured all of the vine presence that we saw on the ground, um, on our shrubs and mid-story trees, or twining or clambering into our canopy trees. So that is indicating that we are looking at some issues. We also saw declining native ground cover, and limited regeneration, limited seedlings and new trees. So to kind of dive into more there, next slide. Specifically, the native overstory, the native canopy trees, such as our native oaks, red oak, black oak, white oak, sweet gum, maples, red maple, sugar maple. That basal area, that actual volume, the space that they take up, which is the measurement we use, increased by 12% citywide. So that is really great. That's good news, and that is the trees are growing. They are taking up more space. They are the ones that we have are putting on more wood or growing larger. Also, that indicates that some of the trees that were in a smaller size class that were not quite 10 centimeters diameter at breast height have grown and are larger and have now entered that canopy, that overstory classification. Next slide. So I talked about how we um, not only measured um, the sizes, but we also identified what species we have. And we did this um, across the whole city. And across the whole city, we found that about that 50% of the volume of our canopy trees were made up of three species. Uh, Quercus rubra, which is red oak, Liquidambar styraciflua, which is sweet gum, Acer rubrum, which is red maple. And in 2014, we found that. We found that still in 2024. Not a great surprise there, but the amounts have shifted just a hair. Everybody got bigger, basically, is the story there. And then the next two most abundant or dominant species that take up the most space in our city were swamp oak, Quercus palustris, it's also called pin oak, and black oak, Quercus velutina. All the rest of the forest is kind of a mix of many other um, uh, different species. So what are some of those new species, or um, what changed in other parts of our composition? The next slide. We lost some species, and some of them that we found at first in our plots were no longer there. Um, these are these four species, which are mimosa, I think, very fine, delicate tree. Pinus resinosa, uh, red pine, and then kind of in the shaded text there, Quercus, which are all the oaks. That's just to indicate that we had no oaks that were not identified down to their actual species, whereas in 2014, some of the assessments that were made, we weren't able to ID it down to species. So that's just an improvement maybe in our data quality. So we didn't actually lose oaks. And then the fourth one is uh, Rus copalinum, or the shining sumac, which is a small shrub. So that nothing really alarming there in the composition loss, but new in this last measurement, we did find a few things. Aurelia alata, which is um, a spiny Aurelia, which is native to Asia, that I think was probably misidentified as our native um, uh, spiny Aurelia. So that was also an improvement in our data. The paper birch was found, catalpa, um, the native holly, the eastern red cedar, a Coverteria, which is a street tree that probably has seeded in, and a number of other species. Um, these uh, some of these trees could have been planted, or like for instance the holly, our native holly, and the eastern red cedar are commonly used in our restoration designs. So that could be what's going on there. But yeah, just a little bit of a change in our new measurements and composition. And then the next slide. Uh, we saw some mortality. Thing we lost a number of trees in the intervening 10 years, and we know that because we tagged individual trees, and so we know exactly which bodies were missing. And highlighted in those that kind of peach color are three most greatest quantity that we're missing, green ash and ash species. And you might be aware that emerald ash borer, which is a non-native invasive insect, which preys on ash, has really decimated the ash population, not only in New York City, but across the US where it's found. And that's definitely what's going on there, why we lost so many ash trees. The next one in that list, Tree of Heaven or Ailanthus, as a lot of people know it, is also impacted by um, another uh, insect pest, the spotted lanternfly, which I think everybody has been happily squishing for a while. So that's definitely making a mark on these trees. In the case of the Tree of Heaven or Ailanthus, it's not really a big loss, if you like, in that it's a invasive tree that is the target of a lot of management to actually remove from forests anyway. The other trees on this list, white mulberry, quaking aspen, um, black locust, black cherry, sassafras, box elder, they are somewhat successional trees. So, kind of the question there is perhaps they are being shaded out by a growing canopy in the sites where we first recorded them. So that's a thought there. Next slide. Something else that we noted was that advanced regeneration, that is the larger seedlings, are absent, completely missing from the majority of the forest that we sampled. Next slide. And that I can kind of break down a little bit with this next figure. Starting at the bottom, we have our larger trees, the canopy trees greater than 30 centimeters diameter, something like this, um, uh, to the overstory that is between 10 and 30 centimeters, the younger canopy trees. Then we have our saplings that are almost adults, almost ready to burst into their what we call our seedlings. Um, ooh, there's a typo in there. Sorry. It should be um, uh, uh, 2 centimeters, not 30 centimeters. Darn it. Anyway, our seedlings that have a diameter somewhere around maybe an inch and a half. So we consider that advanced regeneration. That is seedlings that are actually surviving. The seedlings that are less than that supposed to be, sorry about that, supposed to be about uh, 3 centimeters are kind of questionable whether or not they're really going to last. Um, so when we talk about no mature seedlings, we're talking about that 35%. Only 35% of our plots actually had that successful small trees. So that is kind of a little bit of a flag that things are not so great as they should be. We should have much more of that, like much greater quantity of those smaller trees that will be our future forest. Next slide. So to kind of shift gears about a little bit more about what is good or healthy conditions in our forests, the vast majority of all of our trees in all of the age classes are native. Next slide. And this breaks it down by native, and excuse again those two seedling mislabeled lines there, but among all of our tree sizes, we are majority native trees. Next slide, please. So here's something that is also really alarming, that we have among all of our plots, 91% of them citywide have vines recorded, invasive vines. There's a difference between invasive vines and native vines and how they grow and impact forest condition. If you, excuse me, If you ever are driving along the different parkways in New York, and you see like on the side of the roadway just these mounds of it looks like um, uh, green, but they're in this very blobby shape. Those are all invasive vines that have overtopped shrubs or small trees. A number of vines that we consider invasive grow in that manner where they sprawl over the growth or they twine around the stems of the growth and basically girdle the trees by cutting off their supply of water and nutrients. So this is why vines that have that growth pattern and are, very, very fast growing and fast to take over areas are considered detrimental. And next slide, please. This gives you an idea of across the city in our forests where we have the most invasive vines. Manhattan and Queens, 100%, every single one of our plots had invasive vines. Less so in Staten Island, maybe our most wild, if you like, or greatest number of healthy plots. Next slide. And for example, what are these invasive vines? Our most common ones are bittersweet, Celastris orbiculatus. The next in line up are the porcelain berry, which has these beautiful looking fruit and which made it desirable to even plant for the first time in North America because it's so ornamental, but it really took off. And lastly, multiflora rose, which was actually brought to the U.S. as a plant to control soil erosion, which it certainly did, but it also really became unstoppable. Next slide. So also kind of pointing in the wrong direction, we saw that our native ground cover abundance, although it is uh, um, uh, we have predominantly native ground cover, um, are losing a little ground. It has decreased by 31%. Um, uh, or rather, total ground cover abundance altogether has decreased by 20%, and of that amount, 31% a decrease in native ground cover. So, that's not great, which means that we have more bare space, for instance, that is not covered by any ground cover at all. And we are losing our native plants in that ground cover. Next slide. And there you see kind of across the city some of the places where we've had it's the most loss in Bronx Park in the Bronx, in Saddleburg Park in Staten Island, Bunker Pond Park in Staten Island. We have had in specific parks an increase from where they were, in particular in Conference House Park in Staten Island, all the way at the southern tip. Forest Park in Queens, and Idlewild Park also in Queens, near the airport, near JFK. So next slide, and I think I'll skip right to the next slide there. What's next? So coming in 2026, we're looking forward to doing some more analysis, understanding the exact, even more details about what has changed over time, breaking it down to probably some of the questions that you might ask in our chat about more specifics. We are also updating the forest management framework. Since it's been 10 years, we're summarizing what we have done to increase forest care in those 3 targeted areas. And we're synthesizing what that investment has created and ecological change over time. We're also looking at strengthening our community of practice to manage the forests. We're increasing our um, citywide outreach to individual conservancies, to individuals in our city, increasing stewardship. And I think I'm really running out of time, but I do want to just note that we are working in particular with Riverside Park Conservancy, Prospect Park Alliance, Forest Park Trust, and New York Restoration Project in a few different initiatives. One of them is a large state grant to increase tree planting throughout the state. And there's been a considerable investment in the city, not only to the Natural Areas Conservancy, but the New York City Parks Department through that grant to deal with a lot of this competing vegetation, these invasive plants, by controlling them and reducing the coverage in the city and replacing that with planting trees. And I can go into maybe some of that in our questions and comments, but it's very exciting. And in particular, outside of that state grant opportunity, there's been a wonderful donation from a private donor, Treebed LLC, in a number of parks throughout the city, and most notably in Riverside Park. And we're very excited to be a part of that implementation project as well. And I will leave it at that and turn it back over to Moira, and we can take some questions.
Thank you so much, Helen. That was amazing. I stopped sharing my screen. I hope that's okay. But if we want to reference any particular slides, I can put it back up and we can talk about that
Great, thank you.
for sure. One question we have in the chat, what was the proportion of invasive species found during the assessment? And what can we do to help reduce the presence of these invasive vines?
So the invasive versus native. So if we could go back to those slides, but it's basically the inverse. Well, not quite. So we have, when you break down the, like, sort of how we classify the different species that we see. They're the native ones, the ones that co-evolved with all of the animals and the climate over millennia in New York City, and that we call native. There are the introduced species, and those are either from completely different continents or different regions of North America that have been moved by humans or have changed their distribution only very recently. And so those are called introduced or non-native, but some component of that is invasive plants, and those we classify in that way because they have a detriment to our native habitat. So um, I would have to go back into that data, but basically, if like not if 80% of our canopy is native, that other 20% is divided between invasive and non-native, and I don't have that fact at my fingertip here. Oh, and then what can we do? So uh, that's what we kind of created with our forest management framework, individual steps of what we can do. We can fund the city budget to actually fund the New York City Parks Department so that they can care for their parks. Right now, it's shocking the number of park employees that are baselined in our city budget to be able to have a job from one year to the next and care consistently for our forests. It's really hard to make progress if you're rehiring at best every year, or unable to hire anyone from year to year to care for these spaces. Um, with that said, there are also, conservancy partners who are able to raise funds independently and put them towards caring for these spaces. Um, and I'm really happy to be partnering with so many great groups to do that. Um, Stewards individuals, just regular New Yorkers that come out and volunteer in parks have made tremendous impact. And especially, looking during COVID, I think we did a survey among conservancies and found that 75% of the conservancies we surveyed said that volunteers are making a great impact in how they're able to change the trajectory of conditions in forests. So yeah, keep on doing the good work you're doing. Do more of it. Bring your friends out there and talk to your representatives. Yeah.
And not to self-plug, but Riverside Park and Van Cortlandt Park both have amazing volunteer opportunities where you can get out and actually help and remove invasive vines and be a part of the good fight, as well as many other alliances and conservancies that we have throughout the
Yeah,
park. If
definitely.
you
And I'll
check,
say that, yeah, if you, there's the Pathkeeper program, within New York City parks, the Navigator program, the Super Stewards. There are so many ways, that you can find that out. Yes, and Prospect Park has amazing volunteers too. I was just there this morning. Yeah.
and then we have one more question in the chat. I'd like to know your opinion about Riverside Park, which is largely reclaimed land from railroad yards and industrial past use. Many of the trees at the promenades were planted at the same time and are aging. How should the Conservancy plan for the next generation of these trees?
That's such a great question. Yeah, so I know that Riverside Park has done an inventory like of all the trees in those kind of like promenade spaces and so on. There's a portion of the park that's forever wild woods. And then to the north, I know that the Conservancy cares for a lot of land that is forested as well. The As far as how to do it, one of the things that is kicking off this year, and I don't I think the official in-person kind of kickoff celebration for that is April 18th. And there'll be some definite announcements about this. Uh, and the Natural Areas Conservancy is working with Riverside Park Conservancy. We are just at the point of hiring a contractor to do some of the bigger work, to reduce the amount of invasive plants there and plant more native species to increase the habitat value, increase the resilience and future condition of the forest there. So there are, we know how to do that. The folks in our nonprofits and parks department, natural resources group know what they need to do. It's a matter of, yeah, enacting it, implementing it. So another place where um, volunteers and committed neighbors can get involved to make that happen, uh, is that's so important. And there'll be opportunities to play along in those spaces, and once they're restored to a certain point, to continue to be involved and be a part of that recovery. Uh, I feel like, as far as like, being on reclaimed land and it's not, we are New York City. We're not pristine, you know, wilderness. But what we have is so important. This is the place where the people are. We need to have these natural spaces to recreate in. We need to provide natural forests for our wildlife that are, relying on us to have um, to keep these spaces healthy for them. It's their only place in the city.
Absolutely. And we have maybe a Riverside question. How successful have the goats been, or have they, or can they be brought in elsewhere?
Um, I think that where they were was like a huge impact. I mean, I know the two areas that they were over the years. Yeah, no, I think they were really dramatic. And as well as like they brought a lot of people there. They really brought up the awareness. I think as ambassadors, they had a whole other role too, which was really really great. And they have been used in Prospect Park. Um, where else? I'm not going to get all the goat sites, so I'll just leave it there. But yeah, that's definitely another tool in the toolbox for sure.
And then, do fertilizers play a role in cities' forests?
So we don't use fertilizer in forest restorations or forest care, and that's partially because that's the sort of native state, if you like. The conditions of our forests are very low fertility, if you like, low nitrogen, for instance, especially. That's how our forest plants have evolved. If you give them a blast of fertilizer, you're not doing them a favor. They are more competitive in um, in holding their ground if you don't fertilize our spaces. In fact, uh, fertilization, increasing nitrogen, will increase the competitiveness of a lot of these invasive plants and some of the weedy plants as well. So, yeah, that's a definite no.
Do we have any other questions from the audience?
What's your favorite forest? Throw it in the chat. I've just
Oh
let's see.
yeah. While people think of some questions, I just want to thank Helen again for such an amazing presentation. That was just wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
And I would love to promote, well, as you can gather from the presentation, and from Helen's work, and all of us that work in parks are very adequate and are very passionate about adequate funding for this work to be done. And if you are interested in joining, there's a Playfair rally at City Hall on March 23rd at 10:30 a.m. that a lot of park people will be at to advocate for that funding. I think Haley will send a link in the chat for the Eventbrite. Um, so just want to throw that out there. Yeah, it's right in the chat
Mm.
to sign up. And what are people saying? NYBG Forest is their favorite
Oh, that's
forest.
a beauty. Yeah.
Loyal to Riverside. Thank you for your work, Helen. Riverside Park has saved me.
Oh, wow.
Very, very nice. Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
another thing, we have a post-event survey, that will kind of help us inform building out more of this programming and these lectures. So, however, if you could fill out our Google form that we created about this lecture series, that'd be very helpful. Hopefully, we can get some more lectures throughout the year. Um, based on your feedback. So thank you all. And we have another lecture next week with Mike Feller, who will be talking about the history of wildfires in New York City. And then we will have an in-person event on April 11th in Van Cortlandt Park to do an in-person tree identification walk. So thank you all so much for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.